This is called When Does Sabbath Begin? Okay, I taught this one last year. A lot of new information is in here, so I'm going to focus on what I haven't shown before. There's 3 choices: morning, evening, and midnight. And so we look at these things for many reasons. We look to prove things and hold fast which is true and throw away the things that men have put in there. And we know that we're destroyed for lack of knowledge. So we're Bereans and we look for these things of truth. And Jubilees warns us that all the children of Israel will forget the years, the months, the seasons, and Sabbaths, and they'll go wrong to all the orders of the years. And we know that we've lost the years. We know we've lost the calendar. And these are warnings to us. So the first one that I'm going to look at is midnight, and I did this last year. So basically, midnight is based on a pagan calendar. It has no use for anything in the scriptures, so that automatically disqualifies it. So we'll move ahead. I went into it more last year, but it's up there if you want to read the history and the sundial and how it all evolved. So let's look at sunset. Sunset begins each day on the modern Jewish calendar that they use in Israel, used for religious ordinance. It's the civil calendar. But it's also the result of a process of development that includes some Babylonian influence. And sunset also starts each day on the Islamic calendar, their official calendar of Saudi Arabia. They're all based on the lunar cycles. Where do we look scripturally for the truth of a sunset daybreak or start of the day? The rabbis of the current Jewish religion basically tell us that the Jewish day starts at nightfall. It's based on the first verses in the story of creation in Genesis, where it says, it was night and it was day 1 of creation. And this is what you see when you reach out to rabbis, etc., on the internet and their teachings. And so they also say that it's in their religious books. That collection of books is called the Talmud. Now, we don't look at Talmud. We know it's evil. But we show enough of what they say to understand what they say, and then we compare it against the truth of his word. And they say that their books ask the same question and says that it basically goes back to Genesis 1:5. That's what they hang everything on for a sunset to sunset beginning of the day. And for those that you haven't seen any of these slides before, we have our scriptures, which is about 2 to 3 inches thick. It's everything that our Father has given us, that all we need to know in these days. And that collection of about 30 books is what the Jewish rabbis have added over the last 2 millennia to equate to their additional rules and regulations that control the Jewish population today. And we know this is not valid because our Father says in Deuteronomy 4:2, you shall not add to nor take away anything from what I've said. They're obviously adding to the teachings. The Jewish people are being led astray. And we know don't follow the Talmud, so I'm not going to go through this one today. And there's Deuteronomy 4:2. There you go. So you shall not add unto the word which I command you, neither shall you diminish from it. Everything we have from them says that we're supposed to start at sunset, and they base it through their religious teachings of 30 books into one verse into Genesis. And so you start asking yourself, how much do we trust these guys, right? Because John the Baptist, Yohanan said, "O generation of vipers," when the Pharisees came out and saw him. And our Messiah said, "O generation of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things?" And he said that twice. So we really have to look into this. We can't just take their word for it. So let's look at Genesis 1 through 5. In the beginning, Elohim created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of Elohim moved upon the face of the waters, and El said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And Elohim saw the light, and it was good. And Elohim divided the day from the darkness. And Elohim called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And that last part of Genesis 1:5 is where they hang their hat on sunset, Sabbath, and day starts. Now, most of us have come out of Western Christian churchianity environment where we saw teachers and pastors pull fragments of verses out and make a theology which we now understand is not really based in his truth. We're seeing right here the same thing from the rabbis, because they say, and the evening and the morning were the first day. So they took half of one verse and say, this is how our calendar is. Based on what we know from coming out of Sunday, we know that we need to look a little bit further and that we can't just take half a verse and say that's all truth. So we go back to Genesis 1:2, and it says, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. He says, let there be light, and there was light. And he called the light day, and the evening and the morning were the first day. So you already see light before the evening and the morning. What does that mean? We're going to go into Hebrew a little bit, because this is where the truth really is. Because if you think about it, he said the light already, and it was already day. So you already had a light before the first day that the rabbis are telling us. So I'm not going to go through all of this with you, but I'm just pointing out in red, there is one word that is actually not transcribed into our Bibles. And it's in Genesis 1:5 twice. It's Yahi. And why is that word not in there? It's interesting. It says that word really is become, or came into existence, or followed. And that's just a difference between the Masoretic text that we have from the Torah for Hebrew for Genesis 1:5 and the English King James. And they pretty much track with similar words or the same words between the two, except it's missing that one word that we just talked about. So you have to dive really deep on this word, and I found this really interesting because Yahi has no strong concordance entry into it, but it's put under Hiyah, which is H1961, defined also as become or come to pass or exist to follow. And our particular version of it, Yahi, is called a jussive grammatical mood, which means it's an order or a command, which makes sense because Yah commanded these things. So we do find this word in Strong's, it's just buried, but it's to become, to exist. The interesting thing is, why isn't it in there? Well, let's look to Septuagint for a second and see if they recognize this word. 200 BC, the Septuagint was transcribed from Hebrew scrolls to Greek, and this was before Messiah. And yes, in Genesis 1:5, the Septuagint has that missing word in the transcription for Genesis 1:5. And El called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening, and there was morning, day one. So we have a difference between our King James and the other Bibles that we have and the Septuagint. So you're thinking, well, maybe that was supposed to be skipped. Well, no, not really, because if you look 2 verses before, it's used in Genesis 1:3, and it's really important. Because, and El said, let there be light, and there was light. They transcribed that word for let there be, and there was. So that verse would be pretty barren without our missing word in there. It would be, and El said, light, light. That's what it would be without our missing word in Genesis 1:5. So it's sort of an important word. We're starting to ponder this question because we know by definition and observation that evening starts when the light of the day begins to fade and ends when the daylight is gone. You can't have an evening without first having the light. So if it's as written in Genesis and King James was really the first day starting the evening, day one, then how could the first day be after the first day or the light? Ever thought about that? Interesting, huh? How could that be? Let there be light, and there was light in Genesis 1:3. This is after 1:2, where there was darkness upon the face of the deep. And he called the light, it was there. And then he named the light in Genesis 1:5, and he named night. And then evening and morning were the first day. So, let's also look at Hebrew text punctuation, because if you look at Genesis 1:5 in our King James, there's a period after night, which implies that you take it into 2 different sentences and hold the sentences by themselves. But in Hebrew, there is no punctuation there. There is a pay letter at the end of Genesis 1:5, and in Hebrew that denotes the end of an idea or a phrase. And so it's relatively the same as a punctuation point for a sentence. That's another little mistranslation that we have in Genesis 1:5. our Father is telling us that we need to consider this whole verse in context, and the period is at the end of Genesis 1:5 and not in the middle. There's also something called Hebrew text gapping. And Hebrew is a very concise language where it says the subject or the object of the action one time or so in the beginning, and then expects you to remember these things as you read through it in Hebrew. Now, if you've ever seen a King James Bible in particular, there's a lot of italicized words. And the italicized words are in there to explain for our English readers, us, that those words are not in the original Hebrew text. They're not there. They're implied, but they're gapped, meaning they're skipped over. And so the King James writer, and they did a really good job of this, added those italicized words to help us understand the subjects as the verses went along. I'll show you an example of a gapped verse with and without the italics. And Adam bare Jabal, he was the father of such as dwelled in tents, and here's the italicized, of such have cattle, in Genesis 4:20. Now, if we didn't have the gapped words in there, we would read this in English as, and Adam bare Jabal, he was the father of such as dwell in tents and cattle. So he dwelt in tents and cattle. Doesn't make any sense unless you're living inside a cow. And so that's where the italicized words come in. They add context to us in reading the scriptures. They help us understand it. They were probably a lot smarter than we were, at least me. We need to add those italicized words back in there when they are missing. So we need to add the two words that were missing, the same word that's missing twice. And we need to correct the incorrect punctuation that's in there that's not in the Hebrew. And then we need to look at this verse in context after we've done that and see if there's any gapped words that we need to add. And here's what we read Genesis 1:5 by doing those three things. And Elohim called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And here's a gapped word, and day became night, and the gapped word night became morning, or the first day. That's how you put Genesis 1:5 together. And Elohim called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And then day became evening, and then night became morning, and that was the first day. That's a pretty big statement up here, isn't it? Let's look at the other creation days. Maybe that's an aberration here. So in Genesis 1:6-8, it says, and evening and the morning were the first day, and the third day is the same, and the fourth day is the same, and evening and the morning were the first day. This is in King James. And the fifth day is the same, and evening and morning were the first day on the sixth day. On the seventh day, he says nothing about this, but this is his blessed day. This is his Sabbath. He rested on today. Remember the Sabbath to keep it set apart. And this is a pretty special day of the year, isn't it?
Yes.
It is. It's not because of a pagan day that's out there in the world, because this is the day that he sanctified. So if you look in the Hebrew of those verses that we just showed, every single one of them, day 1 through day 6, those two words is missing from every one of those. It was plain and clear in Genesis 1:3 and many other verses in the scriptures, but at the beginning where he's showing the day, it's not shown. They're not shown at all. I think that's pretty interesting. And so if you read all the rest of the days, and became evening and became morning were the second day, and became evening and became morning were the third day, and the fourth and the fifth and the sixth. So contemplate that, and we're going to go look for second witnesses here. So let's look at scriptures to see what they say that might include or infer timelines that show that days begin at sunrise. Quick definition on Passover: on the 14th day of the first month at even, when the sun's going down, is his Passover. And on the 15th day, the next day of the same month, is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the spring feast beginning. And so the Passover starts at evening, goes through the night, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread is the next day. And we know this was modeled after the children of Israel as they're waiting for the 10th plague, the 10th judgment to hit Pharaoh in the land of Egypt. And then they departed immediately after that plague, which was the angel that passed over the children that had the blood on the doorpost, and then came upon the land of Egypt and killed the firstborn from Pharaoh down to the cattle. And this day shall be unto you a memorial, and you shall keep it a feast throughout your generations. So this is important. This timing is important, and so we need to look at this timing. Leave nothing of the Passover lamb that you kill and eat until the morning. So he says, kill it in the evening, eat it at night, leave nothing of it in the morning, burn it before morning starts. And it came to pass at midnight, Yah smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. Pharaoh rose up in the night immediately after. There was a great cry in Egypt. Not a house was without a dead. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night, in the middle of the night after midnight, said, get out of here. Leave. Depart from us. And go serve Yah as you've said. And so you can see a timeline we're building out there. Midnight in the middle of the 14th at Passover, the firstborn are slain. And then Pharaoh jumps up, runs to Moses and tells him to leave. 12:30, 1 o'clock, who knows, in the morning. Let's go to another witness, the book of Yashar. Pharaoh ordered the children of Israel to be sent away. And all the children of Israel delayed going forth at night. So Pharaoh told them to get up and leave, but they didn't leave at night, it says. The Egyptians were urgent upon the people that they may send them out of the land in haste. They wanted them gone now, immediately, leave at night. And when the Egyptians came to them to bring them out, they said, the children of Israel said unto the Egyptians, are we thieves that we should go forth at night? They're pretty adamant. They're not leaving at night. So they're going to get ready to leave during the night. And the people took their dough before their leaven, and we know that. And the children of Israel asked of the Egyptians vessels of silver and vessels of gold. And they dumped all of their gold and silver upon the children of Israel. At the same time that's happening, Moses hastened up down the river, brought up the coffin of Joseph, and all the other children of Israel took their father's coffins. And this is in Yashar. This is a big turmoil happening at night. At midnight, Egypt is slain the firstborn. Immediately after Pharaoh tells Moses to leave, they say, we're not leaving at night, but give us all your gold and silver. And then the men are going to get the coffins of the fathers, and Moses gets the coffin of Joseph. And Moses said to the people, remember this day, not night, remember this day which we came out of Egypt. There shall be no leavened bread eaten. And this is your first day, your high Shabbat of the feast of unleavened bread, the 7-day feast. 7 days shall you eat unleavened bread. So he's declaring this day that we left to be the first day of unleavened bread. And the children of Israel traveled from Egypt and from Goshen and Ramses and encamped at Sukkot on the 15th day of the first month. So they didn't leave at night. They collected everything they needed in haste, as described by the unleavened bread that they put on their backs. And at daybreak, or immediately thereafter, they took everything they had and they traveled all the way from Egypt to Sukkot, which is a good journey. And then that night they encamped in Sukkot. And this memorialized by the 14th of the even of Passover, where the Passover's lamb is killed. And the first day of unleavened bread, the high Shabbat that he declared for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, is memorialized by the day that our fathers left Egypt and began their journey to the Promised Land. And when you look at Exodus and you look at Yashar 80 and 81, you see they dovetail precisely. Precisely. And what happened back then in Egypt is what we memorialize. And it was the 14th on Passover at night, because that's the day we celebrate. And the 15th is the day, first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread when they left. And both those events were memorialized. And the only way that happens in haste, because they were being kicked out of the country, is for the next day to start at sunrise. That's the only way that works. Josiah did the same thing. They talked about all the services being prepared and all the sacrifices, and the priests were busy with the burnt offerings and the fat until night. Therefore others helped them out and prepared in their place. And all the service of Yah was prepared on the same day to keep the Passover and to offer the burnt offerings upon the altar of Yah. So everything they're doing in the morning, in the afternoon, and the evening, while they're busy burning the fat until night, he says, is the same day as Passover. Right there, it says, all the service was prepared the same day on the 14th to keep the Passover and to offer burnt offerings to Yah. It can't be the same day if the day starts at sunset. It would be the next day. Lot and his daughters. I'm going to skip that one. You can read that later if you'd like. Wilderness quail. I'm going to skip some of these because I have 18 different examples in scriptures that shows this timeline, this type of timeline. Here's a good one. We go to the New Testament. And when even was now come, okay, so that's the time when the light's starting to wane, getting towards sunset, the disciples went down to the sea and entered into the boat and went across the sea to Capernaum. And it is now dark. And Messiah hadn't come to him. Of course, in the middle of the night, he decided to take a walk on the Sea of Galilee, met him on the boat, said hi to Peter out on the sea, pulled him up, got him in the boat, and then immediately they're at the other side of the sea. The day following, when the people came back to where the disciples were and stood where they were and saw there were no boats there. There used to be one boat there, and that's what the disciples took, and they knew that Messiah didn't get in the boat with them, and they were going, where did he go? Why isn't he still around? Because we're looking for the Messiah. But there's your timeline right there. The disciples got in at even, and then at nighttime, he walked across the sea. And then the day following, which is the next morning, the people look for him. And the day following means the next day. And the only way that timeline works by the next day is if the day starts at sunrise. Same thing for preparing his body off the cross. You can look at these also. But let's go back to the reason that they were preparing his body at night. They wanted to get his body down and buried before the next day. Because in Deuteronomy 21 it says, and if a man has committed a sin worthy of death, and he shall be put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but you shall bury him that day. He can't be all night, but you have to bury him that day. The only way that works is if the night is part of that day. And the next day starts at sunrise. We can't stay all night. Another question to ponder, right? So if they had more time, when Joseph went and asked for the body, he had a lot of stuff to do once you think about it. He had to go a quarter, half a mile or whatever to ask the body of Pilate. Pilate says, what? He's dead already. He sends a centurion back to the cross. Yeah, he is. Comes back to Pilate. He says, okay, Joseph, you can have that body. Then he has to go back to Golgotha and bring his body down off the cross, assuming he even has the linens, or maybe somebody else is getting it, Nicodemus is getting the linen. And then he takes our Messiah's body from Golgotha to the tomb, and then he wraps the body. And then he finds the giant stone, and then finds enough people to roll the giant stone on top of him. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. And they got to finish that by the next day, or else they're breaking Deuteronomy. This was the urgency they had, because there's also a high Shabbat on the 15th. And they didn't want to work on the high Shabbat. And that's what the Pharisees were saying. There's an urgency there, so break their legs, get them off the cross so they're not hanging on the high Shabbat. So we know that this is the transition from the 14th to the 15th. And they broke the other two legs and they came to Messiah and he was already gone. They still had to get him off the cross. The other two they probably just threw in a pit somewhere and threw some dirt on him. And that took care of Deuteronomy. And in Luke 23, he says he took it down, the body of Messiah. He wrapped it in linen, laid it in a sepulchre that was hewn in stone, never where man had been laid. And that day was the preparation, meaning the Passover preparation, and the Sabbath, the high Shabbat of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, drew on. Now we skip over that in English, but if you look in Greek, drew on is a Greek word right there, G2020, defined as to begin to grow light, begin to dawn. So as the Sabbath began to happen, as it began to dawn, is when he finished his labors to put Messiah's body in the tomb. Luke is telling us that Joseph labored all night to finish those tasks that we looked at until just before dawn, the dawn starting the high Shabbat of the Feast of Unleavened Bread on the 15th, and the next day to satisfy Deuteronomy, to get a man hung off the tree and buried before the first light of the next day. You see the same thing in Mary Magdalene, right? At the end of the Shabbat, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, and this is the weekly Shabbat, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. At the end of the Sabbath, at the very end of the night, as the rays of the sun are starting to be seen, as it's going towards the first day of the week, as it changes from the 14th to the 15th, is when Mary Magdalene came. This is what the scripture is telling us in black and white. The only way that happens is if the start of the day is at dawn. More examples. I'll go through this real fast. And so after Messiah gave a great teaching of the people in Mark 4, and the same day after this teaching, as he taught all day, when the even was come, he said unto them, let us pass over to the other side. And so the same day that he was teaching is the even, and the even is supposed to be sunset, which would be the break of the day. So it wouldn't be the same day, it'd be the next day if sunset were the break for every day. But it's the same day, even at even. The only way that works again is if the delineation of the day is at the rise of the sun. The term Sabbath day is used in the scriptures 56 times in 50 different verses. The term Shabbat night is not used once. Go check it out. I'll go through these real fast because some people look at the feast and say that Passover begins at even and the Day of Atonement begins at even. And that tells us that the day starts at even, right? Well, let's look at these two, because of the other 11, it doesn't say anything. So that might mean they start at the regular time, and these two start at a specified different time. And so to make that suggestion, what would be the justification for that? We look at the Day of Atonement. It's a Sabbath of rest, and you shall afflict your souls in the 9th day of the month at even. And from even to even you shall celebrate your Shabbat. So in the 9th day of the 7th month at even, from even to even you shall celebrate your Shabbat. And that's a day of affliction. Now we know that Passover is the other one that starts at even. Passover is a memorial to our Messiah's sacrifice first and foremost. It was a shadow picture given for his sacrifice. Passover also memorializes the deaths of Egypt and what the children of Israel did to escape that death. The Day of Atonement is part of the fall feast, which is part of his second coming, which will be shortly fulfilled. Glory to him, hallelujah. But what is the Day of Atonement telling us it's going to be? The Day of Atonement is the day of affliction and truth, because that is the day that he returns with the cloak dipped in blood of the altar on his white horse and the sharp sword of his tongue. And all the nations of the world are gathered against him at Harmageddo. And the angels say to the birds, get ready to feast, because the feast of El is at hand. And then 2 verses later, the birds are feasting on all the millions of people that have just been slain. as he starts wiping out the iniquity of the world upon his return, starts wiping the slate clean. So what you have on Passover and the Day of Atonement are somber occasions. They're days of death. That's why we celebrate these two somber feasts in the even and not in the morning. All the rest of them, Shavuot, Feast of Unleavened Bread, Day of Trumpets, Eighth Assembly, those are all glorious events. Glorious. These 2 days signify, memorialize, prophesy somber events. And so they're put in the nighttime. A lot of Psalms, Sirach or Ecclesiasticus, if you look on a King James Bible from old, also insinuate this. The covenant with David and Jeremiah. Scriptures out of the New Testament again. Peter says, unto a light that shines in a dark place until the day dawn and the day star arise in your hearts. And that's a direct correlation back to Malachi 4:2. And the Son of Righteousness will arise with healing in his wings. And I did a teaching on the Son of Righteousness a few weeks ago, and I did not tell you that because I held it for now. But you can see that the Son of Righteousness arises with glory, with power, with healing. It's a new day. It's the dawn of a new day. Every day the sun rises is a shadow picture to us that he's coming back. And all tears will be gone, all sorrow will be gone. And he'll say, behold, I have made all things new. Because he tells us darkness and light. He told us Sabbath would be forgotten. In Jubilees, he says it plainly. And Sabbath was forgotten based on Sunday, going to Sunday, as we looked at that a few weeks ago. And Sabbath was also mixed up because it got half celebrated on a day that was not sanctified, an unset apart day. I'm going to skip all this. You saw Islam flags in there, Wicca with it, and it goes all the way back to Babylon. So are there other historical references for that? Oh yeah. And just look these up, and many, many books say the days were reckoned from morning to morning. There can be no doubt in the early times the Israelites reckoned the day from morning to morning. Same thing. When the Jews returned to Palestine after the Babylonian exile, they started bringing back with them Babylonian astrology and their way of reckoning time. So you start seeing where this is mixing in with everything else that came from Babylon. More historical references. I can't read them all. But let's go back to the light and darkness. We looked at the sunrise now as his glorious shadow picture to us to remind us every day that he's coming back. And if we're righteous unto him, we're going to have glory with him forever. And Barnabas says there are 2 ways of teaching and of power, the one of light and the other of darkness. And there is a great difference between the 2. For on one are stationed the light-giving angels of El, and on the other are the angels of Hasatan. And the one is our dome from all eternity unto all eternity. He was, he is, he will be. Whereas the other is Lord of the season of iniquity that now is. And this then is the way of light. If anyone desires to travel on the way to his appointed place, which is where we all desire to go, would be zealous in his work. So we need to see how our Creator divided the night from day at the beginning of the book in Genesis, and he's telling us repeatedly that the nighttime is associated with the iniquity of the world as a shadow picture and of these times that we're in. And the day is coming, a new day, a new dawn. And Elohim himself is light. El saw the light and it was good. Elohim is light, and in him is no darkness at all. And you, all of us here, are the children of light and the children of the day. It doesn't say we are the children of the light and the children of the sunset and the night and the day. We are not of the night, nor of darkness. The New Jerusalem, the glory of El lightens it, and the Lamb is the light thereof, and there shall be no night there. I'm going to skip that. And these aren't the words of the Father. This is from my own experience. So I came to the truth of the Torah beginning in spring of 2018. And I started watching Messianic ministries that are online, popular ones. And they told me it was a nighttime calendar. Sunset. I said, gotta be. They know what they're talking about. And every Friday afternoon I'm working. I had a hard job. I worked until sometimes 7 o'clock at night on other days. And on the Friday day, I'd have to leave work early, leave some of the stuff I needed to do. I'd rush to the store, rush to buy the stuff, rush home, put it on the pot on the stove in the microwave, clean what I needed to clean, looking at the time, know what time sunset is, looking at the sky through the window. Is the sun down yet? Can I get one more thing done? And in the wintertime, 4:30 is when it started. So I'm leaving early and have compressed time. All the stress to finish before sunset. That's stress. That's a burden. Those are chains. It didn't feel like I was falling into his blessed rest. We're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to work like every other day. If I had to work at 7, I should have worked till 7. I could have gone to the store leisurely, could have cooked. If it took me till 10 o'clock to cook and clean, or 11, or even 12 if I was way behind, it's okay. Just get it all done. And then it's all done, and I go to sleep. Last year, I understood this, and I would wake up on Shabbat. It's like, I slept in. I felt great because I knew there's nothing. And I started the day off fresh, relaxed. Started the day off in his glory, worshiping, reading his word. That's what Shabbat's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be another Babylonian rat race to get everything done when the sun goes down. Got it. Did you make it? Could you see the sun going down? Was I 2 seconds late? Not supposed to worry about that. Get it done during the evening, during the night. Go to sleep. It doesn't matter how late you work because you get to rest all the next day. Sleep in a couple hours if you stayed up late. And you wake up in a blessed state and peaceful state. He is peace. And the sun is appointed for Sabbaths. In Jubilees it says, Elohim appointed the sun to be a great sign on the earth for days and for Sabbaths. Jubilees 2, 8 and 9. That's the last word. So we looked at these things. When does Sabbath begin? We looked at midnight for 30 seconds. We looked at sunset for a few slides, a couple minutes. And we looked at morning. We looked at it from a deep dive into the Hebrew verses, finding words that weren't there and punctuation that was different. And italicized words that could be added to help us understand the truth of the entire verse. And we started looking at all the examples in scriptures of very specific events that happened. And they had to happen on certain times and certain days because they were fulfilling the feast. And those are his appointed times they can't miss. And we saw historical references and some other things. And from all these things, brothers and sisters, we can only deduce that this was yet another trap put out by men. Because once we jumped into the truth of Torah and the glory, we jumped out of one trap, but then we jumped right into another because the adversary is that good. He's that good. He knows that people are going to wake up from Western civilization and Sunday worship, and they're looking, and then you look at all the teachers out there, many of them, most, have sunset. So you jump from that thinking they're right. You trusted the pastors, now you trusted them because they've been studying a long time and they're on YouTube or whatever. And as we look at all this, they weren't right either on this. And so we have to keep striving for the truth. We have to keep striving for righteousness and sanctification. We have to throw off all things that are not of him. No matter how much we thought we knew, how much we've done it before, we have to understand the truth and accept his truth. These are his words. I've shown you his words. And the summary is, Yah severed the light from the darkness, mixing them up and starting his set-apart day, and the night is putting his light, his Sabbath, into darkness. Historically, the evening from even Sabbath and the days and the calendars were brought in by the Jews from Babylonian moon god worship influence. That's not good. The light and the day is a representation of the righteousness and glory and prophetic fulfillment of Yah, and for his children, the children of light, the children of Elohim, the children of Israel, which we all are. The darkness is a representation of the sin of the world and Hasatan. And he told us we'd forget the Sabbaths. Did not understand we'd forget it in more than one way. So we've seen the measure of the things, as an old character said, and there's just one more thing. Now, if the day begins at sunrise, then what do you do with a calendar that bases the first day of each new month on the first sighting of a new moon? Because if the day starts at sunrise, you're already halfway through the day waiting for the first day of the new month. That could be another deception, couldn't it? But unto you that fear his name, the fear of the Most High, his name, Yahuwah, shall the Son of Righteousness arise with each day as a picture to us of his coming glory, with healing in his wings. And he said, behold, I make all things new. And glory to the Father for opening our eyes on these things as we keep looking for his truth and his light and his glory. Hallelujah. This will be on the website if you want to look at the rest, if you want to be a Berean and take these things in your heart and meditate on them. That's what we're called to do. Glory to Yah. Thank you, everybody.